Well, good morning, everybody. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. I always like coming to Iowa, and I always like talking to good producers like you all. Um, Ajay and Dan, I mean, do a great job here, and I was happy to come over this way when they invited me. And I'll just say, information's a two-way street. I mean, I'm here to learn what you guys are doing too, to take it back to my producers back in West Virginia and beyond. And so if you have any good ideas, I'm going to try to steal them from you, unless they're patented or proprietary or something. So some of the things I'll be talking about today may even just be second nature to you, which is okay, I guess, because sometimes you need to be reminded about things you need to do when you're growing these crops in high tunnels. But anything that you have a question about, feel free to just interrupt me while I'm talking. I'm not offended at all. That might be a good time to talk about it rather than wait to the end of the presentation. But anyway, I'm pretty informal, and I do show a lot of pictures and tell a lot of stories about the crops. So we're not going to probably go down the road on some of these things too far. But anytime you have any questions, and your extension team here in Iowa is incredible, and you probably don't need to reach out to anybody outside of the state, but feel free to send me an email, which I'll give you my email later. But I had a handout that I could send you that would accompany this presentation that might be useful. But in order to save paper, I didn't want to have it printed out for everybody. So if you email me, which I'll give at the end of the presentation, you guys can call me up if you need to. Well, we're not too different in climate in West Virginia. As you can see there in the star, that's where our campus is compared to Iowa. This is the heat zone map. I kind of look at this thing and laugh because it says West Virginia is 20 to 40 days temperatures 85 or higher. Yeah, right. We were easily 60 to 90 days in the 90s, upper 80s, low 90s, mid 90s in West Virginia this year. We were locked in and are still locked in. Probably one of the most serious droughts we've had in our state in probably 50 or 60 years. It has been a stressful year for everybody growing food in West Virginia. And I think you're dry here, and I'm thankful that you're going to get some rain here this afternoon. But we need all the rain we can get in Appalachia as well. So, it looks like our average maximum temperatures are not so different. And we'll talk about what you can do with high temperatures in high tunnels. But, if you look at the other side of that on the hardiness zones, we're just one hardiness zone south of you all, mostly in zone 6. In fact, if you look at our state now, it's mostly in zone 6B. But so you do you're a little colder here, so your minimum temperatures are a little bit lower than our minimum temperatures. So hopefully some of the recommendations and advice I have here this morning are not too off the wall or too off the charts for what you guys can do or what you can grow in this state. So best management practices, that's kind of what I wanted to hit here this morning. And it's just kind of all these practices that you have to do sort of in sequence in order for this high tunnel to be profitable and efficient and, do the thing that needs to do for your farm. So really, if I talk about these best management practices, I just call it things which increase marketable yield, which I know you all are interested in doing, trying to maximize marketable yield. What you sell at the farmer's market or what you sell wholesale or whatever. We're trying to reduce input cost, things to kind of preserve or enhance soil health. So we're always going to be aware of, how healthy the soil is in these high tunnels. And also any other type of activity that we can have to increase net farm income. So we're probably going to create an office of high tunnel efficiency too. There might be an office of high tunnel efficiency created, but it's a way to sort of every year, you just get a little bit better, maybe 5% better, 10% better. And I think it's just kind of things that you learn over time. It's all experiential. That's what I tell my producers. You sometimes don't know how to grow a crop until you just grow it. We can talk about how to grow things like okra and tomatoes and things. Sometimes you just have to experience growing it to kind of figure it out. And that's kind of, how we approach these things. Pretty basic stuff. I mean, if you haven't done a soil test yet, now's the time to do it. probably if you're going to your Iowa State soil testing lab, I would guess November is probably when they have less samples coming in from other producers, but I may be wrong on that. But you know, you're looking for times of the year where your land grant soil testing lab is just not swamped with samples from other farms, and usually fall is a good time to do that. I always sort of promote, you know, the land grant soil testing labs. Is it free here in the state? Do you get a soil testing analysis free, or is it?
Actually, unfortunate that the agronomy department runs the
Okay.
testing, but I think it's now only for research samples.
Oh, really? Okay.
So most of the samples our growers might send to the Midwest lab or
Okay.
University of Minnesota.
Yeah, there are some good private labs out there. I'll show you in a moment. In West Virginia, we have a high tunnel soil testing program. So within our soil testing lab, we have protocols for just high tunnel soils. So, you know, somebody brings in a sample, we kind of know what to expect on some of those benchmarks on what we call soil health. But, you know, there are some, like I said, some really great private testing labs. Ajay mentioned Midwest. We use Waypoint a lot. Sometimes, like I said, if we got a sample out there and we know that the lab is swamped, these private labs are really cool because they'll get your results back usually in 72 hours, and they'll email them to you. The downside of that is you probably won't have extension eyes on it, so you won't have your county agent reviewing your soil test at the same time, which is kind of nice to have. It's good to have a second or a third opinion sometimes, I think, you know, just for, does this look right? Is this supposed to be? Because sometimes these labs, they're a little biased towards certain things that they look at. So you just need an unbiased extension person to look at that. And sometimes the fees are, you know, $15, $20, depending on what you want to do. We'll talk about having a salt test done. Definitely recommend a salt test in your soil, particularly if you're older than 4 years in production in the high tunnel. So a salt test is something I would do every year. You know, it's just kind of like you got to be prepared for what's next. You know, when does something flip in the tunnel? You know, when do your salt levels start getting to the point where, okay, they're edging up. Okay, so I can no longer grow beans in there anymore. I can no longer grow strawberries in there because my salt levels are getting so darn high. It's good to sort of be aware of that before it actually happens, because it might save you a lot of problems down the road. So those are just some of our soil test results that we have from some of our producers. And I just kind of wanted to hit some of the key points about them. So test at least once per year. So now would be a cool time to test, but I kind of recommend testing between crop cycles. So that would mean like testing now, or testing maybe like in March, when you're kind of transitioning from cool season crops to warm season crops. And then right now you're transitioning, or probably have transitioned from warm season crops back to the cool season stuff. So that's kind of a good time to do it. I think you know this, and you know the folks in NRCS have been incredible in our state in helping producers with soil testing. But soil testing is just a habit. You just got to do it, you know. And I know that people don't like to do it, but you just got to do it. And we give soil probes to people, and you know. But in the end of the day, you guys have to go out there and do the soil sampling yourself. But we still like these tunnels to be built over mineral soil fields, you know. So we've got folks that are growing in soilless media in these tunnels, which is cool. But I think in the end, or way we started out, we wanted these tunnels to be low tech and, you know, efficient, and sort of be put on mineral soil. So most of our tunnels are on soil-based systems, but that soil is heavily used. I mean, it's, you know, you've got multiple crops coming in and out, transitioning, you're rotating a lot. There's a lot of foot traffic in there. You know, you're walking on the soil a lot, so there's compaction issues. Just because the soil is warm, the organic matter levels deplete faster. So there's just a lot of issues that are unique to high tunnel soils that really you know, require us to sort of be on top of them before things start going downhill soil health wise, you know, and I think that's really important. So just a few things to pay attention. Obviously pH is one of the first things you should be aware of when you get a chemical analysis of your soil. Most of these crops, you know, do well in 6.2 to 6.8, or you know, tomatoes 6.2 to 6.5 on them. We have a lot of farmers with tunnels that have high pH. I don't know, is that an issue here in Iowa? So when your pH is above 7, so then you can get some micronutrient deficiencies. For example, I'll talk about cold crops. So if you tried to grow like cabbage or broccoli or cauliflower, and if your pH was above 7, you possibly could have a boron deficiency or something like that. So there's all these interactions of pH with nutrients. So how do you lower pH? I think the simplest way to do it is just get some granulated sulfur or pelletized sulfur and just broadcast that and till it in. That's certainly probably the cheapest way to do it. There are ways that you can get like sphagnum peat moss, and you could incorporate sphagnum peat moss into the soil. That would lower the pH too, but that's way more expensive than buying a bag of this pelletized sulfur. And so, there are charts, and I'm sure Iowa State has charts, if you want to, based on your soil type, your soil texture, what's your target pH you want to drop it down to, then it tells you how many pounds of sulfur to put on per 100 square feet, per 1,000 square feet. So again, you want to kind of be in that range of that 6.2 to 6.8 for most of these crops. Tomatoes can take down into the mid-5s without any problem, but you really don't want to be below mid-5s, and you don't want to be above 7 or 7.1 or 7.2 on most of these soils that you have. Yeah?
Have you used calcium sulfate at all?
Like gypsum, huh? Yeah, no. I guess that is an option. I mean, you're obviously adding calcium to it as well. So we just went for things that were just straight sulfur, just the elemental sulfur. Yeah, I don't know. I think they use gypsum. Sometimes if your sodium levels are high in your soil, you can use gypsum to displace sodium from the soil, and I'm not sure that's an issue here where you have high sodium levels in the soil. But I'd say it's your local, is Agway still here in the state? Is that, who's your farm supplier? Is it not? Okay. Well, I mean, we have Southern States in West Virginia, so they sell, you can get a bag of sulfur, and you can use a little lime spreader or drop spreader to spread it. But it's actually, a situation where you could find yourself in if you're like putting on a lot of compost, particularly mushroom compost. That's really pretty basic stuff. And you could be just driving your pH up and you're not really knowing it. And then you turn around one year and you do a soil test and you're maybe 7.5 or 7.6 on pH. You say, uh-oh, I got to drop that pH down. So another thing that I think is really important for high tunnel producers to look at is organic matter percent. So organic matter is sort of that stable fraction of your soil that has the nutrients in it. It improves the porosity of the soil, helps water holding capacity, makes the soil sort of friable. So we like to have organic matter at certain target levels, and that should be tested. So always have an organic matter test done on your soil test too. And most of these private testing labs will automatically do an organic matter test. For our lab, it's an extra fee. I think it's another $5 fee that they'll have for the organic matter test. But I'll just, these are things on your radar, right, that you should be aware of. Don't over apply compost, and you would think the more the better. And I know a lot of folks think that way, and I used to think that way before I started really critically thinking about compost. But manure-based compost, particularly like the one on the bottom there from one of our local dairy farmers, I mean, I don't put more than one wheelbarrow full, 6 cubic feet per 100 square feet. And I call that a maintenance level of compost, okay? That's not like you're trying to add all your nutrients that the crop needs with one slug of compost, because that gets you down a road you don't want to take. So that's kind of, and I think that's where the folks at Michigan State that's sort of their levels that they were using on their high tunnels. And so don't go nuts with like adding organic matter like peat moss and things to your soil, which you feel that you really just want to bump that organic matter up. So just don't go put a lot of soilless media into that, because and that's the great thing about being a farmer, is you're also a chemist. Because I mean, if you add a lot of soilless media to your soil, you'd be surprised the amount of magnesium that's in that soilless media. So you're driving your magnesium levels up in your soil, and magnesium competes with a lot of other nutrients in the soil too. So that's important. So for us, and I think for you all, if you're on a silt loam soil, you kind of want to be in that 5 to 10% range on organic matter. And I think if you're going up to, particularly if you're in the mid-teens, you're a little bit on the high side. That's where you start seeing nutrient imbalances if you're above 15%. But you kind of, the sweet spot, I think, is that 5 to 10% range. And you certainly want to be, above 3%. So that's something to just, get that soil test back. You say, okay, I'm still 3%. There's time to add some organic matter. And compost may be an option. I think what would be great is if you could find yard waste compost, not manure-based compost. So you go to a local municipal area that's composting your yard waste. That stuff is really good because it's a great soil conditioner, and you don't get the phosphorus and the potassium, and you don't get the salts from it either. But if you are using compost, have it. I think I would have it tested from one of these labs that I've already showed you. Our soil testing lab doesn't test compost, so you'll have to go to a private lab for that, probably. But have the salts tested for it, and the pH and the nutrients. And then we do a bioassay. So our pathologist does a bioassay of compost. He'll actually grow out plants in compost to see if it has any type of issues, particularly if there's any residual herbicides. So if you are like composting hay, there are a lot of residual herbicides that are translocated through grass and hay. Gray zone, some of these phenoxy herbicides that they use on pastures and meadows to control weeds, all that carries over to the grass, and that'll carry over to your compost, and that'll just nail your tomato plants. I mean,
go back one slide. What
sure.
was that word you used for the residual herbicides? Bioacid?
Yeah. You could call up one of these private labs and ask if they do a compost bioassay where they actually grow like peas or beans in pots with the compost, and they see if there's any issues with using those as indicator plants for whether there's any issues with the because you don't know. I mean, particularly if you haven't made your own compost, you don't know what the farmer that you buy it from has used. And I think we've all heard horror stories of people just losing crops because the compost had residual herbicides in it, which is terrible. I mean, because the only way out of that is you have to just take that stuff out of the tunnel and then backfill it with soil again. So there's really no way to remove the tunnel, which is kind of a drastic thing. Okay. So, and then, like I said, this is kind of to sort of underscore the point that you don't want to use compost as your sole source of fertilizer because, you're putting on 10, 15 tons per acre equivalent to get the amount of nitrogen that some of these crops need. And that's a fair slug of phosphorus and even potassium. I'm not so worried about the potassium, but you got to watch those phosphorus levels in the soil in these tunnels because phosphorus competes with nitrogen uptake, and phosphorus competes with calcium uptake. So you just kind of have to watch that your phosphorus levels are not being driven up by your fertilizers. Our growers use triple 19, which is pretty decent slug of phosphorus in it. So you just want to make sure you're not on pretty high levels with that. So you're putting on somewhere around 0.6 or 0.5 pounds per square foot on compost. And we broad fork the soil prior to putting the compost. And then, this medieval tool, which the students call it as a workout tool. We just kind of like, it's a great way to get an exercise, but it's great to aerate the soil. And I call it a manual subsoiler, so that might be good before you put on the compost. So kind of watch those macronutrients, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, that you're not getting super high levels of them, and also request a soil test. A salt test, as I mentioned before, for tunnels over 4 years in production. And you kind of want to be below 4 millimoles of salts. And most of these crops, some of them are ultra sensitive to it. I've seen tunnels with strawberries that would look like that because they had high salt levels in the soil. So it usually looks like somebody took a blowtorch to the plant and kind of singed the outer leaves of it. Plant remains stunted. It never is able to grow out of it because it's not able to take enough water into the roots because the soil is holding all the water and preventing water uptake into the roots. you can actually crop out salts. You can grow crops like spring oats or spring barley, and you can actually wick it out of the soil with some of these cover crops if you want to. And you can see some of those brassica crops are actually a way to take some of those salts out. So you're taking the crop residue out of the tunnel and you're kind of wicking those salts up. That's one way to do it. There's some beans that we did a trial with a few years back. They're ultra sensitive to salts. So if you're seeing, crusty salt on the soil, like around a drip tape, that's not always an indicator that your salt levels are high. So I'd have it tested anyway, because that doesn't usually correlate with high salt levels just because you're seeing some evaporated salts on the soil. But this is just reflex stuff. You just kind of like, okay, and we'll do a soil test. We're going to do a salt test too. So ask them to do a salt test so that you don't have to guess whether your salt levels are too high. So the easiest way to deal with salts, I think, is to just take the poly off every 5 years on the roof of the tunnel, and then just let these nice winter rains that you guys will hopefully have this winter leach it out. You might get 15 inches of rain between October and March, maybe a little bit more than that. That'd be enough to move all those salts out of the soil profile. So that's the easiest way to do it. And then you could also put a cover crop there and then have the roof plastic off of it. And so, and if you go nuts, you could say, I'm just going to flood irrigate it, and just, you could leach them out with a flood irrigation. But I think it's easier just to do it with, sort of the rhythm of taking your plastic off every 5 years. Now, you're not like me where you keep plastic on for 10 years, right? And you let the wind take it off for you, So, yeah, don't want to be like me. That's not the way to go. But you kind of like, okay, poly should be replaced every 6 years, 5 or 6 years. That's a good time to leach your salts out of your soil and maybe go dormant or maybe go fallow in this tunnel and let nature do its own thing. And then you could also be creative and grow saltwort, which is an herb that sucks up salt out of the soil. I'm kind of half joking here because this is a crop that somebody told me that you could sell this to restaurants, but it is a crop that's grown in high saline soils, so it actually absorbs salt into it. So if you thought you had a market for somebody, ask one of your fancy chefs around if they would buy saltwort. Hey, I'll grow some, and maybe it'll take some of my salts out of the soil. So maintaining soil health, I mean, I know the NRCS is great on this, and the extension has been highly promoting winter cover crops. And I'm sure Rachel Rudolph last year from Kentucky was talking about some of the cover crops that they do in Kentucky. This is a best management practice 101, winter cover cropping. So this time of year, you may be all in on winter crops, which is great. But if you're fallow, I mean, if you really the tunnel is sitting pretty much dormant, it's a little late now, although it is still feasible to establish a cover crop, a winter cereal. But you could have established a winter cover crop that would be just growing slowly all winter and fixing nitrogen for you and aerating the soil and building your organic matter and working for you. It's a cash crop, it's working for you. So, if you found that you just terminated your worm season stuff, just turn the page and put a cover crop in there. I think that's the way to think about it. Yeah. So you just kind of have to decide, do you want to do winter cropping? And winter cropping, which I'll talk about in a moment, is kind of a challenge. But sometimes you want to maybe take the winter off and let your tunnel rest. And you can rest too. Rest your mind, rest your body, kind of recharge your batteries. And that's a way to think of that. So we've done some winter cover crops. You've got some great cover crop seeds companies here in Iowa that you can source cover crop seed cheaply. And that's been our challenge. We just can't get cover crop seed in bulk. And you're not using more than 3,000 or 4,000 square feet you're planting. But our penultimate mixture, our what I call all-star mix of cover crops is triticale, winter rye, mixed with winter pea, crimson clover. That blend has been our premium cover crop mix. And so I think, you would probably find the same results here. And I'm an advocate of no-till production of crops. So, I mean, you can go all in on no-till in these tunnels even on how you establish the cover crop. So some of our growers just broadcast seed the cover crop on the soil that's been, the tarps have been removed, the plastic's been removed. They just broadcast the seed. Then they broadcast some clean hay or straw over it. And then they use overhead sprinklers and just wet it down, and then they reestablish the cover crop that way. So rather than going in there and grinding the soil again with a tiller, this is a way to get your cover crops established no-till, and you don't need a no-till seeder to do that. Yeah.
How are you terminating and dealing with the residue in there? We're just direct seeding early in this spring, and we've just found cover crops really problematic for.
Well, I'll show you. We use tarps. We smother it. So we ain't using herbicides in these tunnels. I mean, we're not using burn down herbicides because we don't want to deal with the residual life of those herbicides. So yeah, we just mow it and then tarp it, and then tarp it for 2 weeks, and then then you can till it in. I mean, okay, multiple decision points here. I mean, you could break the residue up and take it and use it somewhere else. Till in the stubble and the roots. You can go no-till, which is what we like to do. So you're just planting into the straw residue. I mean, if you're seeding carrots, that's not going to work. But if you're transplanting, which I like to transplant almost everything I can do, if I can get a plug out of it, I do it. So then you can just plant it as a plug in that straw residue, and then put your drip tape down and just go that route with it. And that's there's no reason. I mean, there's no reason really to invert the soil or to grind it with a tiller. At some point, that kind of breaks down the soil structure, and you start seeing crusting on the soil, and you see compaction issues. So kind of don't go too heavy-handed with tillage in there if you can avoid it, and maybe think about doing some of your crops no-till. So yeah, we don't do this. I mean, this is how we do our field plots, but we have a roller on our BCS tractor that we roll. So you can roll it, which this is a nightmare actually because yeah, it doesn't tell all about the arguments and problems we had with this, but the vetch there does not roll and crimp. So yeah, but crimson clover rolls and crimps. But in the end, we just ended up using this thing to roll it flat and then put a tarp over it. The crimping wasn't working. It just wasn't working. So the vetch is fine, but the thing about vetch is it tends to reseed itself pretty fast. So you can actually get more nitrogen off of crimson clover than you can vetch. So actually, if you're looking for something to, an analog for vetch, it would be crimson clover as a replacement. So that's, you can see we just take a weed eater in there. One of my students did, and just mow it off. You can take a sickle bar mower or whatever, and then we put the silage tarp on it, and we shut the tunnel up and we bake it for at least 2 weeks, and then it kills all that residue. And we pull it up, and we've got a mat of straw, and we're good to go. I mean, so there's your mulch for weeds right there. You're conserving soil moisture because you have a mulch. So this is kind of like another issue. Well, do you want to be early? If you plant into straw mulch or hay mulch, the soil's going to be cool. So you're not going to be hitting your early market if you do this, because the soil will be cool under this mulch. But if that's not an issue, then it doesn't matter. So what we end up doing is we just replace that with a ground cover, with a woven ground cover. So you do get the heat of the ground cover, and then we just plant into it. We just burn the holes with a propane torch, and yeah.
Just 2 questions on the cover crop.
Mhm.
Do you inoculate your crimson clover?
Yes.
Can you
So
repeat that question?
yeah, so Ajay asked if we inoculated the crimson clover. So I think we were talking about the seed companies here in Iowa. They probably sell it pre-inoculated, I would guess, because when we get it off of Center Seeds in Ohio, they sell it already inoculated when we buy it. But otherwise, you'll have to get inoculum from some farm supply store, and then you just wet the seed down a little bit with a mister, and then you just dust that inoculum over it.
Just one more question.
Yeah.
So is 2 weeks enough to kill that?
Should be. Yeah, Ajay wanted to know if 2 weeks was long enough to kill the cover crop. Yeah, I mean, if you look at what time of the year this is happening, in March usually. So you're terminating this winter cover crop usually in March. So usually, get fairly sunny days. You can heat that tunnel up. It'll be 100 plus in there definitely, and that'll definitely kill that cover crop residue. So I don't know any other way to do it, because you don't want to use Roundup or glyphosate in there at all, or don't want to use gramoxone. So I think smothering it is the best way to do it. So weeds, anytime you have weeds in a high tunnel, you've got insects coming in on the weeds. So you go baseboard to baseboard with this ground cover. And when you seed your cover crop, try to go baseboard to baseboard with your cover crop too. So you give weeds no quarter. They get no quarter in the tunnel. So weeds are, they just bring all the subset of problems with them. So if you can go end to end with your ground cover and your mulch, you're going to be in a good situation. I have not done a lot with the warm season crops. Everybody's in such a flurry to get things growing in these tunnels in the warm season. The only time that we've been able to slot them in is when the plastic was off and we did buckwheat. And Rachel, I'm sure, talked about sun hemp last year as a winter or as a summer cover crop, which is a legume. It's a tropical legume, which you could use as well. Whoops. Temperature and humidity management in these tunnels. This is our high tunnel at our state fair, and I just put that picture in there because we use we make a natural shade curtain out of our beans, our pole beans, So we just kind of like angle it so it's shading the other crops, and we don't have shade cloth on the tunnel. But it kind of shows how you can kind of be creative with the plant architecture a little bit in these tunnels, particularly when you're trellising these crops in these tunnels. You can angle the trellises. You may not have caught that first picture on the first slide. It was me talking in front of my bean trellises. We've done a lot of work with slanting bean trellises. So it's kind of that same theory. We're angling them so they get more sun on that side, but then we're also getting shade on the other side. So it's pretty cool way to get natural.
So what direction was that facing? Was that facing west?
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's shading the south side. So your most intense sun is being shaded. You see that's mostly zucchini, which is not that critical to be shaded. But if you had a crop like peppers or something that you didn't want to be sunburned, or even tomatoes, you might want to plant a wall of, and maybe your in walls are open, so there's airflow in there. You kind of wonder whether that's going to affect air movement in there, passive air movement. But you still, with your in walls open, you're getting pretty decent airflow in there. So, you guys are the artists. You can be all sorts of things with these crops in here, and that's just one way to do it. Ajay and I were talking about these Aegis control boxes yesterday, and the way that you can kind of inch towards a little bit more of automation on temperature management, I think that's a good thing. A little bit pricey, on some of these systems. Ours are solar powered, but every grower that I work with that has this system has been really impressed with this as a temperature management system for their high tunnels, and it's been very reliable, and we have never had any hardware problems with it at all over the years. And some of our units are 6 or 7 years old now, and so it just kind of keeps the temperature in that tunnel at a sort of a uniform level, and it rolls the vents up and down based on what threshold temperature you set on that control box. And we actually use it for our ridge vent, which I'll show you in a moment. But so get a little soil thermometer if you don't have one. Because I can't tell you actually when to plant things here in Iowa, but I can tell you when to plant based on soil temperature. Yeah.
On the controller, does it also take into effect like wind conditions?
You can get a wind sensor on it. Yeah. So if you have a thunderstorm approaching, when I'm usually panicking because I'm not on the farm, and I see a straight line thunderstorm coming, and it'll pick up that wind, and it'll start closing the sidewalls for you, which is cool. So yeah, I'm going to pick up the pace here because don't want to spend too much time. So these are some soil temperatures that I look for when I plant in my warm season crops and my cool season crops, and some of this stuff you probably already have, the wireless thermometers and things. This is kind of the question I had for you all. Are you guys using shade cloth on your high tunnels very much? Is it standard practice? Or yeah, that's what I'm saying. Hey, we're in the mountains of West Virginia and we have to use shade cloth on our tunnels. I mean, it's a given. Northern West Virginia, we're using 30%, and our central and south, we're using mostly 47%, black or white, either one. And, you can improve airflow in there with some HAV fans, which are great. That's our ridge vent at one of the farms. Ridge vents are nice. They, exhaust air that rises in the tunnel. And I would guess Nolt's has a ridge vent, right? They sell. So there's all these greenhouse companies sell these ridge vents, I think. This happens to be a Rimmel nor'easter. Yeah.
When you set up your tunnels, are you going like a north, south, east?
Try to go north, south.
Is that really that?
Well, I honestly think, the way I'd orient them is you want to get cross ventilation. That's the deciding factor. So light is secondary. So north-south, I think, is better, at least for us. Our prevailing winds come out of the southwest, so we get good cross ventilation if we try to orient them north-south. East-west, I think, is good if you're doing things in, well, you're almost above 40 degrees latitude here. Are we 40? Is this 40 here? So, I mean, if you're above 40 degrees latitude, you're always going for an east-west orientation, if you can, for winter light. But I think for total light, north-south is going to be optimal, and for cross ventilation if you possibly can. So that's kind of how in RCS, the folks have been on board with us recommending everybody orient in north-south. But, in West Virginia, I mean, flatland ain't common, so sometimes you can't find a field or a piece of land that goes north-south enough, so you have to orient them kind of east-west if you can fit it in there. But that's something to consider, if you're doing that. So, yeah, just different crops in there. 92 degrees is kind of my threshold temperature for tomatoes. I think if your tunnel's getting routinely hotter than that, you're going to see issues of pollination, and you see some of the internal whitening on the tomato there, or the yellow shoulder, which you don't want to see either. So all that is not good to see. Sometimes flowers will fall off if your temperature is too high. Although I'll talk about this later. We've moved towards growing heat set tomato varieties. I mean, these are hot set tomatoes. I mean, I never would have thought in 100 years that we would have to grow hot set or heat set varieties of tomatoes, but we do. But we're routinely in the 90s now, ambient. And so we need to keep it as cool as we possibly can, or grow a heat set variety. Use row covers if you possibly can. I'm a big advocate of using row covers. That's what chilling injury looks like on tomatoes. So if you're seeing that, if you've had some cool nights, if you plant your tomatoes in March or early April and you've got some really cool nights in a row, you might see some yellowing on the leaves. That's usually chilling injury. The plant will grow out of it, no problem there, but that's common. I'm not sure our diseases that we see are the same diseases that you guys have encountered in your tunnels. This is all gray mold here. So we kind of like to keep the residue cleaned up as nice as we can, but we see a lot of leaf mold, and because our humidity levels are so high. So leaf mold has been our predominant problem in tunnels because we just have such high humidity. And to lower that humidity, these are just some things that we recommend. That's kind of where that ground cover tarp kind of comes into play, because if you can cover the whole ground surface of the tunnel, you have less evaporation of moisture from the soil, so your humidity levels are lower. So that's kind of good. So don't irrigate at night. So if you run your irrigation timers at night, I probably would change to irrigating in the morning or early afternoon. In fact, you should be irrigating in your high tunnel before 4 p.m. If you are running your drip irrigation. And don't close your vents up at night. And I know that's kind of tough to do sometimes if you're getting cool weather in a row, where maybe you have a wildlife that want to make a visit into the tunnel at night, But sometimes if you close that tunnel up at night, it really builds the humidity up and it triggers that leaf mold outbreak. So, but there are options. We use Reva's Top, which is a synthetic, but it's been very effective at suppressing leaf mold. And then if you want to go the organic route, you can suppress leaf mold pretty well with copper hydroxide. And if you haven't thought about, the type of sprayer you're using, a high pressure backpack sprayer is what we recommend. Always scout for insects, put those sticky cards up and just walk your crop, routinely to see if there's any buildup of pests and if you're, catching aphids or whiteflies or cucumber beetles on the sticky cards. My colleague in entomology and I have an insect exclusion screen study, and it's been very effective on controlling cucumber beetle, really effective. And so if you're growing cucumbers, which is a high value crop in these tunnels, you can really reduce your cucumber spotted or the bacterial wilt and just damage to the crop using these parthenocarpic cucumber varieties with insect screens. If you need cross ventilation or if you need pollinators, this is not going to be a good situation unless you bring in pollinators, unless you bring in a box of bees or if you use mason bees or something like that. But these are very effective in excluding some of these damaging insects. Different types of planting arrangements. I just threw these raised beds. These are some raised beds that we built last year that go transverse to the tunnel, and so we're going, opposite direction, and which works pretty good. I like raised beds. There's just so much you can do with them. You can increase the depth of your soil. You can blend your soil to make it even higher quality. Framing material is all over the map. I mean, I've seen them framed with recycled materials, cinder blocks. Most people are using untreated boards like what we use there. But really good if you're coming into an area that maybe the soil is just terrible, then you can put a raised bed up and then you can make your own soil. That's the cool thing about them, So yeah, and succession planting is a key to success, and just stagger those plantings. And so we have succession planting charts that I know that you guys have here in Iowa too. So you just kind of know how to stagger these plantings so that you have an uninterrupted supply of that crop, because your folks at the farmers markets, people you're selling to, maybe grocery stores or restaurants or whatever, they don't want to have any gaps in supply. So this kind of makes sure that you're just, chugging along, meeting those demands as they go, and all that. So these different cool season crops. This goes back to the basics. I mean, rotate as much as you can. So rotate between plant families. Don't grow plants that are in the same family year after year after year. You already knew that, I know. But rotate carrots and beets because they're in different families, so that's a good rotation mix. But we do a lot of intercropping too, and that's where some of this is art and science. So this year, we had a study where we relay planted tomatoes into strawberry bed, and we've done lettuce with tomatoes, and we do all sorts of crops with cucumbers. So there's lots of combinations of companion plants that you can use in these tunnels to use that space efficiently. So okay, so if you're kind of figuring out, if you draw a little map of your high tunnel, you're saying what percentage of my high tunnel is in crop space. You really want to be above 60%. Okay. So, you don't want a lot of dead space walk paths and things like that. So you kind of want to make sure you're using that as efficiently as you can. So I, don't have a lot of time to talk about some of our medicinal plants that we've grown in tunnels. This is just, food for thought. Can you grow medicinal plants in tunnels? Yes. Is there a market for them? Possibly. But it just expands the portfolio of crops that you can grow in these tunnels. It may be things that you wouldn't normally grow, like the bitter melon or echinacea. You can tap into health food supply stores or health food stores that know how to process these, so that might be an option. The ginger and the turmeric. How many folks are growing turmeric? I know it's been pitched here at this meeting before. Okay. Does it grow well here in Iowa, in tunnels? Okay, yeah. It's the only way that we can grow turmeric in West Virginia is in the tunnel. And I like it. It's a medicinal plant, but it's also a culinary plant. So it's really, and so it just kind of does its own thing. I mean, it's sitting next to a row, of cucumbers or a row of carrots, and it just kind of does its own thing. So I'll talk more about this in my afternoon session, but we've looked at cabbage. As soon as I go home, I'm going to plant onions. So we're planting winter onions. So these are some of the yellow granexes we'll be planting in November and harvesting in April. That's an option for you. And the cukes, which I think some of you grow, highly profitable, crop that can be grown in a tunnel that can be trellised and pruned, and just incredible yield and even market demand for cucumbers. So, and then tomatoes, which I'll also hit on this afternoon too, and some of our varieties. Anybody grow this variety? It's from Johnny's, but I think other seed companies sell it. But it's an interesting variety. It just, it's just like you just got to grow a variety until it flames out. And then when everybody else starts growing it, you move on to the next thing, right? So this is, it catches people's attention at the farmer's market. It's a little, cherry tomato, and it's got great flavor to it, but it has that bicolored look to it, and that's kind of interesting. We graft our tomatoes, so you guys maybe should look into that. Difference in yield with grafting is easily 5 pounds or more per plant with grafted plants. So you're getting, if you're selling tomatoes for $3 or $4 a pound, you're getting $15 to $20 extra revenue from grafted tomatoes than you would if you didn't graft them. And then, of course, pruning them and watering them. We see a lot of blossom end rot because people are not watering tomatoes enough. So just make sure you're on top of your irrigation schedule, and make sure you're pollinating them. I'll talk about melons this afternoon. We see a lot of tomato fruit worm. I bet you guys see a lot of tomato fruit worm, right? Because it's corn earworm, so you're bound to have a lot of that on it. So it's nice to have an organic or an organic insecticide that just nails them. So you can see the cadaver there of a hornworm, not a fruit worm, but it'd be the same, after it's ingested dipel, BT. It just cooks them, and that's really a nice thing to see. When you got something that's eating your plant day and night, and you're just like, okay, there's got to be some revenge here. But aphids, always scout for aphids, but some of our really progressive organic growers are, interplanting the alyssum with that, and it's bringing in the Ophidius, which is a pretty good predator for aphids. So you can keep aphids in check with some of these banker plants that you can grow in there. So I know that was a lot to hit you all at once. I'm completely out of time, Dan. So yeah,
you got 3 minutes for questions.
Well, you guys can ask questions. You can email me questions if you want to. But
Give us your email address.
yeah, let me just pop that up there. So that's whoops, sorry. So that lewis.jett@mail.wvu. Yeah.
I really appreciate your points about going back to the basics and doing things like soil testing.
Yeah.
And ensuring that constantly developing. I wanted to ask you about some comments about the importance of also doing water testing.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Especially right next to poultry or something.
Sure. Yeah, the question is about water testing. Yeah, I think just from a food safety standpoint, you'd have to have a microbial water test done. And I don't know all the labs that do those. We have a water testing lab on campus that will do that tests well water too. So you need to test for E. coli, if you're downstream from if you are using surface water, definitely have it tested. I think in well water, definitely. So I think I'm microbial water test, and we have people that use rainwater catchment systems where you can, put a big supply tank and you put rain gutters on the tunnel. I would even have that tested because you can get bird feces in that, and so that's a good point to make. I think also the other part of that is maybe have an irrigation water test for hardness to see what your calcium levels are, or your phosphorus levels are in your water. Maybe you have sulfur in your water. Some people have iron in their water. So sometimes if you have hard water, you have certain types of drip tape that you can use that are high flow drip tape that'll take that issue out of the problem. But yeah, good point. Thank you. Yes.
I'm not sure if there's a concrete answer for this. One of the questions that we're trying to answer for ourselves right now is, in all of our tunnels, we're running 3 crops a season in every bed, and we're doing a lot of ripping out summer crops to get the fall crops in, or planting summer crops later than ideal. And we're trying to kind of evaluate, whether pushing to get those 3 crops in, we're looking at like baby greens to like say parthenocarpet cucumbers to Salanova or something like that.
Mhm.
We're sort of trying to evaluate whether those 3 crops, whether we're getting more out of our tunnel or whether we're putting in more labor and decreasing profit on each of those crops because of when we're ripping them out. I'm just sort of curious about your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, they're kind of like yield thresholds you should be getting on your cucumbers. I don't know. I mean, you should be getting, at least 12 cucumbers per plant. I mean, if you're not getting that level, probably, underperforming on the cukes. On tomatoes, like I said, our benchmark is you got to be at least 15 pounds per plant on tomatoes to make it profitable. But is there any way you can overlap the crops? I mean, like I said, I was showing that you can interplant some of these crops.
Tomatoes in the middle of like the Salanova, we just ripped out like the
Mhm.
middle. And we had 2 tunnels side by side and one we had fabric right away. We ripped out all the lettuce, put in fabric, put in the tomatoes, and the other one we just ripped out the center row, put in the plants.
Mm.
And I don't know about yield because we didn't compare yield, so over the season. But we did see in the first 3 weeks, those tomatoes that had the lettuce on either side and without the fabric were just slower to flower, to
Mm,
to
right.
grow. So that
They're kind of, it's a deep-rooted versus a shallow-rooted thing. They're not really competing in the same root zone head to head. So
it
they're,
might have just been the heat. with the
yeah,
black
it
fabric,
probably was.
but-
It all comes down to economics. I mean, that's the decision point. I mean, how long do you have a market for these crops? If these like cucumbers and tomatoes, they're indeterminate, so they just keep producing as long as the temperature's warm enough. They'll just keep producing. So, do you have a standing demand for cukes all season, or is there a lag in price when maybe some of the garden cucumbers come in and the price goes down? So maybe there's an opportunity here to take out your high tunnel cucumbers and establish a more profitable second crop like peppers or something. So I mean, it depends on your own market when you're seeing some of the lags in your price on some of your crops. But I think if a lot of our cucumber high tunnel producers, they just see a standing demand for cucumbers. I mean, people pay $1 a cucumber in May. They'll pay the same price in September. So there doesn't.
That's how we feel about all the
Uh-huh.
crops.
So you just need to build more high tunnels, Yeah, you just need to add more tunnels, but yeah. You just need to. You're not working hard enough, You just need to. You need more. No more vacations for you guys, but yeah. And like I said, if you need somebody to look at your production plan, I'm happy to look at it. I mean, just to kind of see your planting dates and if you kind of know what your average yields are and see if you're hitting those areas or not. But I appreciate all the time.